She buried her boy before the sun came up. No preacher, no cross. Just her hands raw from frost, pressing the earth shut over what was left. A wool hat too small for a man laid at the head. A broken compass at the feet. Everything else had been burned in the fire or taken by those who came before she arrived. The grave sat beneath a skeletal willow where the river curved like it had changed its mind. Behind her the mountain held the silence like a secret it refused to share. And in that cold moment Eliza Maynard did not cry. Not for the boy she raised. Not for the man he died as. Her grief had outlived its right to make sound. By the time the sky turned lavender, she'd packed what she had: a saddlebag of dried herbs, a flask of boiled water, a stitched letter no one had opened. She cinched her coat, mounted her mare, and pointed her west, not toward home, but away from it. 3 years she had waited, letters unanswered, one telegram misspelled and late. Then the boots arrived in a box. The world didn't end that day, but something inside her did. Something small and flammable, hope maybe, or softness. So when the road forked near the dry creek marker, and the wind shifted like it was whispering a dare, she didn't turn toward the familiar. She let the horse decide. And the horse, stubborn and wet from snowmelt, walked toward a town that looked like it had been forgotten even by the wind. She didn't come to stay, but she didn't leave either, because sometimes, when the river turns back, it takes you with it. She didn't mean to stay in Dry Creek. It was just where the horse stopped. The town wasn't much, just 3 streets of tired buildings, clinging to memories older than the paint on their doors. Dust settled on everything like a second skin, and even the wind sounded resigned. Eliza Maynard tied her mare outside the only place with a flickering lamp, a shop with cracked windows, and a hand-carved sign that read, "Reeves Piano Repair." Inside, the scent of linseed oil and old music filled the air. The man behind the counter was all angles and silence. Gray hair pulled into a loose knot, hands, calloused from years tuning what others had forgotten. "You renting the back room?" he asked without turning. Eliza hesitated. Then, "If it's dry and quiet." He nodded, tossed her a key. "Don't mind the mice, they don't mind you." That night the mattress was thin, and the ceiling leaked moonlight through knotted wood. But it was still. No warbling clock, no crying boy. Just silence thick enough to hold her breath in place. Some nights she lay awake listening to Eldon Reeves tune strings in the front room. The notes he played weren't songs, just fragments. Scales, unfinished harmonies that never found a home. Like him. Like her. At the corner of the window, an old photo curled in dust, a woman in a bonnet, arms around a young man. Eliza looked away. She wasn't ready for memories that didn't belong to her. On the 3rd morning, as fog clung low to the ground and crows watched from the steeple, she lit the stove for the first time. Fire took effort. That was the point. No one asked why she came, and maybe that's why she stayed. The room was never meant for living. It smelled of varnish and dry mice droppings, and the wallpaper peeled like old skin. But it had a window facing west, and at dusk the light hit the dust in a way that made it shimmer like gold left behind. Eliza hung her coat on the crooked nail by the door and set her saddlebag down with a tired thud. Eldon Reeves didn't speak much. He tuned pianos for folks in towns that barely remembered what a song sounded like. Said music was a kind of memory some people had forgotten how to feel. She didn't argue. Someday she wished she could forget too. That first evening, she opened the satchel and took out the only thing that didn't smell of travel, a folded paper wax sealed in black. The corners were creased soft with time, but the seal had never been broken. She stared at it as the light faded, like maybe if she didn't open it, nothing inside could hurt her. Then she put it back. Below her, the shop hummed with distant hammers striking strings, keys being pressed gently like questions. No answers ever came, just music raw and unfinished. Eliza cleaned the stove with a dry cloth, boiled water, washed her hands, sat by the small table and watched the kettle cool. Every move was a ritual, a kind of stubborn prayer to order, because chaos had already taken too much. She slept in her boots that night, couldn't risk dreaming of the boy again. By the end of the week, Eldon had built her a shelf. No word, no note, just a plank of cedar with nails bent into place. She found it one morning with her teacup sitting neatly on it. That was how he spoke, in wood and small gestures. The town was quiet. Dry Creek didn't ask questions if you paid in coin and kept to yourself. A woman could disappear here, or reappear slowly. On the fifth day, she lit the stove before dawn and stepped out back. There was a patch of frozen dirt by the fence. She knelt, broke the soil with her bare hands, and buried a handful of wildflower seeds. Too early for the season. They'd likely die. But she did it anyway. That afternoon, a boy limped into the shop with a busted accordion and a busted smile. Eldon fixed the smile first with warm bread and milk, then the accordion. Eliza watched from the stairwell. The boy reminded her of someone. Thin hands, dirt under every nail. A grin like he hadn't yet figured out the world would disappoint him. His name was Micah. He'd lost his father to the mines, lived with a cousin who drank. Eldon didn't ask questions, just pointed at the bench. Sit, watch, learn. Micah came back the next day, and the next. Always something else broken. Sometimes he asked Eliza if she played. She never answered, but she'd tune the kettle for him when the shop got too quiet. One evening, Micah left behind a crumpled drawing on the counter. It was a woman on a horse. No face, just hair flying back like wind had carved it. Eliza folded it into her coat without a word. That night, she opened the black sealed letter. Her fingers trembled like strings before the hammer. The ink had faded, but the words hadn't lost weight. He died calling your name. She folded it back. Didn't cry, just stared out the window until the moon peeled itself from the clouds and shone directly into her room. It was a Tuesday when the man with one boot walked into Dry Creek. Nobody saw him arrive, but come dusk he stood outside Reeves' Piano Repair, leaning against the porch post like he'd always belonged there. Hat, low coat, torn one boot caked with red clay, the kind that didn't grow in these parts. The other foot wrapped in strips of canvas. Dust clung to him like he owed it something. Eliza caught sight of him through the kitchen window as she poured broth into a chipped bowl. Her hands paused mid-motion. Something about the way he stood, tilted but rooted, rattled the edge of her memory. Eldon didn't speak, just cleaned the same tuning fork 3 times. The man didn't knock, didn't call out, just waited. Until Micah showed up. The boy ran up the steps with a busted harmonica, froze when he saw the stranger, then looked to Eliza confused. You know him. She didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. The man looked up. Eliza Maynard, he said, voice rough but not unfamiliar. Didn't think I'd find you on flat land. Her throat tightened. I thought you were dead, Caleb. He smiled slow and sideways. You're not the only one. Inside the shop, Eldon moved silently. Drew the curtain, locked the back door. He didn't ask questions, but he'd lived long enough to know when peace was only temporary. Micah, wide-eyed, whispered, Who is he? Eliza took a deep breath. Someone I buried once. Over stew and silence, Caleb sat at the edge of the table, one hand always near his coat. He didn't eat much, just watched. You still play? He asked finally. Eliza shook her head. He nodded as if that confirmed something he already knew. Shame. You were the only one who could make the dark sound like it had a heart. Micah looked between them, then stood to clear the dishes. Eliza stopped him gently. Let him finish. Caleb didn't thank her. He just kept watching like he was counting how many pieces of her were still whole. That night after the shop closed and the boy had gone, Caleb followed Eliza upstairs. You told him I was dead, he asked, voice soft but sharp. I told myself you were, she replied, not turning. And the boy, he's not yours. A long silence, then, but he could have been. She didn't flinch, not even when he stepped close enough to smell the smoke still clinging to his coat. There's a man, he said finally, back east, asking questions. About a fire in Dawson County. About a woman who vanished with a child and left behind a blood trail. Her breath caught. I told him nothing, Caleb said, but he's coming. Eliza gripped the window frame. Why warn me? Because I owe you, he said, for what you didn't do that night, for what you carried alone. He paused, looked around the small, quiet room. You built peace here. I won't be the one to break it, but he will. Before dawn, Caleb left, just like he came in silence. On the porch, he left his harmonica rusted and cracked. A gesture, not an apology. Eliza picked it up, turned it over. Inside, a folded piece of cloth, burnt at the edges, a sheriff's star stitched onto it. Her fingers trembled. The past wasn't chasing her anymore. It was already here. And she had a choice to make. The next morning, Dry Creek looked the same, but everything inside Eliza had shifted. She folded Caleb's cloth, tucked it into a tin, and buried it under the floorboard beside her cot. The sheriff's star scratched her palm like a ghost refusing silence. At breakfast, Micah chattered about the harmonica, never noticing how tight her grip was on the kettle or how she kept glancing toward the window. Eldon noticed. he always noticed. You said he was dead, he murmured when Micah went out to fetch firewood. He is, she said quietly. To me, doesn't mean he won't rise again. She looked at him, eyes hollowed by memory. He warned me. Eldon slid a worn envelope across the table, her name written in script she hadn't seen in years. This came last week. I didn't want to spook you. Inside was a wanted poster. Old, creased. Her own face staring back, younger, harder jaw, clenched like she'd been born in the middle of a gunfight. Wanted Eliza M. Wesson arson, aiding a fugitive, endangerment of a minor, reward $400, Dawson County, 1871. She dropped the letter like it burned. That night she sat by the stove with a tin box and a single decision she'd spent 6 years outrunning. Run or stay. She'd buried her name, her voice, her music, built a new life on silence and stew. But Caleb's words had stripped the varnish off everything. Micah, the boy wasn't hers, not by blood, but he'd begun leaving drawings on her nightstand, her face sketched from memory, her smile imagined. And in one of them he'd drawn her, holding his hand with flowers blooming from their feet. If she ran again, she wouldn't just lose a town, she'd teach a child that love never stays. If she stayed, the law might come for her. But what was law when the truth had never been told? At midnight, she opened the floorboard again. Inside, a revolver wrapped in cloth. 5 bullets, one fired long ago in a barn fire no one could prove she lit. She hadn't pulled the trigger that night, but she hadn't stopped it either. She touched the grip cold as memory. Then slowly she stood, went to the work table, unfolded her satchel, and began to write. By morning, a new note sat on Eldon's piano. If I don't come back, burn this letter. If I do, I'll bring the fire with me, but this time it'll be honest. E. She left the gun in the floorboard, but she took the sheriff's star. She found Micah sitting by the stable sketching a broken wagon wheel. I have to leave town for a day, she said. Maybe 2. He looked up, eyes narrowing. You running? She knelt beside him. I'm finishing something. He nodded slowly. You coming back? If there's still a fire burning, she said. He reached into his pocket, handed her a matchbox, one left inside. Bring your own just in case. Eliza saddled the mare before dawn. The sky was violet with the ache of morning. As she rode out, the piano shop faded behind her like the last note of a song not yet finished. Toward Dawson she rode, back into the ashes. Not to run, but to speak the truth out loud finally in a town that had only ever heard lies. Dawson, 1871. A town built on debt and dust. Eliza had arrived under a different name than Claire Wesson. 19, barefoot, belly empty, but voice full of honey. She played fiddle at a saloon called the Clover's Jaw, where whiskey drowned more confessions than any church pew ever could. Caleb was the deputy. Sharp shooter, square jaw, empty eyes. The kind of man who could draw a gun faster than a heartbeat but never once looked like he enjoyed it. He wasn't cruel, but he was empty. And empty men find full women and try to drink them. They weren't lovers, not in the storybook sense, but they shared soup when neither could afford bread, shared silence when the law got too loud. And they both worked for Sheriff Malden, a man whose justice came in bottles and fists, who called Caleb boy in public and hound in private, who looked at Eliza like she was property on a shelf, until one night, she wasn't. It was summer when the fire happened. A man named Jude Braxton came through town, black coat, busted jaw, a 5-year-old boy trailing behind him with dust in his curls and bruises on his back. Sheriff Malden wanted them gone, said Jude was a bounty jumper, said the boy was stolen. But Eliza saw something else, the way Jude flinched every time his son coughed, the way he kept a photo of a woman pressed inside his coat like armor. She believed him. Caleb didn't, not at first, until Jude collapsed in the alley behind the Clover's Jaw, with 2 bullets in his leg and a folded letter clutched in his fist. It was addressed to Eliza. I didn't steal the boy. I buried his mama beside a sycamore tree outside Rio Bluff. She asked me to bring him somewhere quiet, safe. I don't know if Dawson's the place, but I thought you might be. Eliza wept quietly. Then she lit the letter with a match. Let it burn between her fingers. That night she broke into the sheriff's office. Caleb followed her. Inside, Jude was chained to a cot. His boy Micah was curled in a corner, asleep but trembling. Eliza unlatched the cell. Caleb stood at the door, silent. Move, she said. I can, he answered, but his voice cracked. Then you're choosing him. Caleb looked down, at his badge, at her, at the boy. Then he dropped the key in her hand. They slipped Jude out through the back, loaded him on a wagon headed west. Eliza kissed Micah's forehead, promised she'd follow soon. She never saw Jude again. By dawn, Sheriff Malden was dead. The office burned to the ground. Rumors spread, betrayal, arson, escape. Eliza didn't pull the trigger, but she lit the fire. She'd seen too many women disappear under men like Malden. She wasn't going to be one of them. Caleb ran that night, left the badge in the dirt, left her with a scar and a silent thank you. And she became Eliza Maynard, not to hide, but to start over. Years passed. Jude was presumed dead. Micah reappeared outside Eldon's shop 2 winters ago, holding nothing but a harmonica and Eliza's name written on a wrinkled scrap of paper. She didn't ask how. She just opened the door. Now on the road back to Dawson, Eliza's fingers traced the edge of the sheriff's star. Burned, bent, still sharp. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. She wasn't writing to clear her name. That name had been buried in ashes long ago. She was writing to tell the truth, because silence had saved her once. But it had cost her everything else. Dawson hadn't changed much. Same dusty boardwalk, same leaning saloon, same courthouse clock that rang 5 minutes late. But the names had shifted. The people had gotten smaller, or maybe Eliza had grown in the silence. She rode slow, let them see her, let him see her, because she knew he was watching. Caleb stood by the old stables, leaner. His coat hung loose, his hair peppered with gray. But those eyes, they hadn't aged. They were still empty. He didn't flinch when she dismounted. Eliza, he said, as if tasting the name for the first time. You kept it, she said, nodding toward the star on his chest. It caught sunlight like a lie. He looked down, shrugged. Someone had to fill the seat after Malden. Then quieter, didn't expect it to be me. She looked past him, toward the courthouse. You sent the letter. I needed to know if you were still alive. He shifted. Didn't expect you'd come here. I came to end it. They stood in silence, years between them, fire between them, blood between them. You could have stopped me that night, she said. I did, he answered. No, her voice hardened. You stepped aside. That's not the same. His jaw clenched. You don't know what I lost. No, Caleb, she stepped closer. You don't know what you kept. He didn't draw his gun. She didn't draw hers. But the courthouse bell rang noon, and judgment had already begun. They sat across from each other in the saloon, a table worn with stories. I read the file, he said, sipping coffee gone cold. Malden wasn't just dirty, he was a butcher. Half the town feared him. Eliza waited. I found Micah's name in a ledger, he continued. Jude Braxton wasn't the thief. He was the only man who tried to rescue that boy from being sold. Her fingers twitched. And you, I knew, deep down I knew. Then why the hell did you wear his badge, she snapped. Caleb looked at her, and for the first time in years, his voice cracked. Because it was the only way to keep Malden's kind out of this town. Eliza leaned back, breathing shallow. Truth was a strange thing, it cut deeper than bullets. The door creaked. A woman entered, mid-30s, hat low, eyes sharp. Caleb stood immediately. This is Deputy Vera. She's with me now. Vera approached Eliza, laid a file gently on the table. You were never wanted, ma'am. Charges were dropped the year after Malden's death. Turns out the only thing you burned was the rope holding folks down. Eliza blinked. Why send the poster, she asked. Caleb looked away, because I needed to see if you'd run, or if you'd finally stop. A long pause. Then Eliza opened her satchel, pulled out the tin box. Inside folded paper and dried flowers, her letter. She slid it across the table. Give this to the records office. Let the truth sit beside the lies. She stood. Caleb rose too, not to stop her, not anymore. Where will you go? He asked. Back, she said. To the boy who still believes I'm worth waiting for. He nodded once, eyes soft. You always were. Outside, the wind shifted. Dust curled upward like smoke from an old fire that finally found peace. She climbed onto the mare, looked down at Caleb. This town don't deserve a sheriff like you. He held her gaze. It deserves the version of me you made. For the first time in 20 years, she smiled. At the edge of town, she passed the sycamore tree. Its roots, deep bark scarred by time and names once carved in fear. Eliza reached out, touched the trunk. There, faint but real, was the name Micah etched with a dull knife long ago. Beside it, someone had added another name, Eliza, smaller, careful. She looked back toward town. She didn't need to return. Her name had already stayed. Micah had grown taller, not much but enough for Eliza to notice. He stood in the doorway of the piano shop, wiping oil from his fingers, apron dusted with sawdust. His voice when he spoke cracked just a little. Took you long enough. She smiled, hoarse from road dust and silence. I had to settle an old echo. Micah didn't ask for details. He just stepped aside and held the door open like he'd done it every morning since she left. The shop hadn't changed, still smelled of cedar and brass, the same cracked tile by the stove, the same dent in the counter where she'd once dropped a jar of wild honey. But the window upstairs now had curtains, blue ones like river cloth, and on the table beneath a clay cup with wildflowers, fresh. Eliza unpacked slowly, no rush, no wait. At dusk, she found herself by the fence where she'd planted seeds months before. She had forgotten about them, but they hadn't forgotten about her. Small green shoots had broken through the dirt, trembling in the wind like newborn promises. She knelt, touched the soil. It was dry but alive. Behind her footsteps, she didn't turn. Micah sat beside her. "Thought you might want to see." Eliza nodded. "I thought they'd die." He shrugged. "Some things don't know when to give up." She looked at him, this boy who had once limped into the shop with broken music and no name. Now he hummed when he worked. That night she lit the stove. No need for words, just warmth, just flame. Micah placed 2 bowls on the table. Stew, simple, thick with root vegetables and smoked beef. He'd learned. They ate in silence. The kind of silence that only people who trust each other can share. When he finished, Micah cleared the table. But before he disappeared into the back, he paused. "You're staying." Eliza looked around, at the shelf Eldon had built. The flowers, the stove. "I'm home," she said. He nodded once, like that was all he needed to hear. Later, when the moon hung low and silver over Dry Creek, Eliza stood at the window upstairs. The wind tapped gently against the glass. She didn't hear gunfire anymore, or horses screaming, or boots chasing. She heard the soft click of a door closing downstairs, the shift of wood as the shop settled. A breath of peace. She unwrapped the tin box, took out the letter. Then, without fear, she fed it to the stove. The flame caught, slowly curling the paper line by line. "He died calling your name." Ash fell softly into the embers. She let it go. There was no applause, no grand ending. Just a woman alone but not lonely, watching the stove crackle in a town that once forgot her, now learning to remember. And outside, seeds pushed upwards, slow, stubborn, but certain. Because even out here in the still winds of the West, some things bloom again. Okay, and if this story stirred something quiet in your chest, like a memory you didn't know you missed to stay a while, here we don't chase noise. We sit with silence. We tell the kind of tales that find you on lonely nights and leave you warmer than they found you. Subscribe to Still Winds of the West, because some stories aren't meant to be shouted. They're meant to be shared, slowly like coffee by a fire. We'll be right here, waiting by the hearth. Three killed was a worm.